What's up, Laker fans? Welcome to the Laker Film Room Podcast. I'm Pete, joined by Darius. And D, I was thinking about this last night, that of all of the things as we discuss, what the hell can we talk about in this kind of dead zone of the season? We haven't had a single conversation where we've considered, hey, what if the guys from the 2023 draft could possibly help out in any sort of way? Which is kind of odd for second-year type of guys. That's usually, at least, from us fans and people who follow the team, summer's the time of hope, right? Where you're like, hey, I sure hope these guys can contribute. And you can talk yourself into some things. It's part of the fun of being a fan, D. But I have a hard time doing that with the young guys.
Just to interject really quickly, we had those exact conversations about Max Christie last summer at this time, when he sort of showed flashes at Summer League, and we liked what he did as a rookie with the limited amount of time that he got. And it was sort of just like, hey, Max Christie, I feel like he could maybe play this upcoming season and be a helpful guy.
That's right. And so that's why it's so curious. And part of it is I'm very anti-scapegoat and let's find one person to pick on. And whenever there is that person, when there inevitably is, I try to at least be like, hey, I try to deflect whatever I can, right? It bothers me that's that. I really dislike those two players in a way that I rarely do with Lakers. And they're so young, and there's so many instances of players not getting it at first and then they get it, right? But I just wanted to talk about the 2023 draft and whether those guys can contribute. Help me see the good in them. I know you're still holding on to some JHS stock. Dan Wyke reported that both of those guys, Lewis and JHS, have been impressive in the offseason workouts. I think Redick can be great for them and for the young guys in general. So talk to me a little bit about where you're at with those guys.
Before we get into projecting them forward, I think it's important that we just hammer home the point that one of the reasons why we look at them, particularly JHS, as sort of a disappointment is not just his own play and the injury stuff, which was bad luck stuff, kind of with the back and the impingement and then needing surgery. He probably could have gotten that surgery way earlier and potentially played in Summer League. But I think that they hoped for rehab and all of this other stuff for it to work out, and it didn't. And so he didn't have surgery until way later in the season, and that was that. What makes it hard, though, is the three guys drafted basically right after him all showed that they could play in some way, shape, or form. And that's a tough pill to swallow when you're a Lakers team who I think needs to continue to hit singles and doubles on their draft picks, with the understanding that their goal is to be able to draw stars to come. And you don't need to draft, it'd be great to draft Kawhi Leonard at 15 or whatever, right? But in the bigger picture, it's much better to be able to draft a guy who has a 10-year career at number 17 and gets a second contract from you.
Well, in the bigger picture, you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis right now, and the whole point is to be competing for championships. So you can make a good argument that you shouldn't even keep that pick in the first place. You should be looking to move that for the best player that you can right now. And this is part of my, as I left the organization of what do I think about the team and how do I evaluate? That's one of the main takeaways that I have, is that there's multiple people's visions operating at the same time, where if you're looking way down the line, this 19-year-old point guard he's a couple years away, but in a few years, he's got tools, positional size, can play some defense, got some passing feel and all of this. But even the best case scenario of him doesn't convert into a good player until way down the line. So it's how does this align with just the bigger picture goals?
Well, one of the things that you and I talk about a fair amount behind the scenes, and we have these conversations with Mike as well, is the national view of the Lakers and how that can sort of impact projecting what the team is like. But there's also a time where I feel like internally we can have our own view about how good some of these guys are or aren't. And one of the things that was interesting that you've always said is take Alex Caruso, for example. I think this is verbatim something that you've told me before, so sorry if I'm spilling the beans. But you've said All it took was him to put on a Chicago Bulls jersey before people realized he was one of the best defensive guards in the league, right? He was that good of a defensive guard his last season with the Lakers as well. But when he's at the Bulls, it's like, oh, second team, all defense member, Alex Caruso. Oh, Alex Caruso, defensive player of the year buzz.
One distinction, it's not putting the Chicago Bulls jersey on, it's taking the Lakers jersey off. We saw this with Austin last summer, where everyone's like, oh, Austin, Team USA, he's great.
So this is my point about LeBron and AD, is I think nationally people have a pretty good understanding of how good LeBron and AD are, although they're probably a spot or two too low in terms of like overall rankings. Like, is AD above or below Jason? It's like, whatever. These guys are top 10. They're considered top 10, 12-ish level players, which puts you at an elite level within the league. My point is, though, is part of the idea of how much do we value the 19-year-old point guard? How much do we value a draft pick in 27, 29 is the idea of, well, how good are LeBron James and Anthony Davis? Mm-hmm. As a decision maker, you have to sort of walk this interesting line of, I believe in these dudes, but do I believe in them to say, I'm going to give up every single future asset and leave my cupboard entirely bare? Or am I going to...
And it's like, how long do I believe in them? How long do I believe in the oldest player in the NBA? It's a fair question. Although I've been arguing, if you've been paying attention to LeBron for the last several years, I've been saying LeBron's going to be a superstar for a while because he's got several things about his game that can endure. Sorry, I digress.
No. I think this is important, though, because if there was any sort of second guessing about how good LeBron and AD were, in the same way that we talked about, all it took was for Alex Caruso to take off a Lakers jersey. Mm-hmm. In some ways, all it took was for LeBron and AD to put on a Team USA jersey and suddenly be two of the closing players in the most important moments of the most important games, with the best American players and the best players in the world when you talk about they're playing against like Serbia and then with France, with Wemby sort of ascending. Mm-hmm. All it takes is for, look how good and important these dudes were to this team, that if you had doubts about, oh, can they be championship level players for the Lakers? No shit, they can be. Look what they just did for this other team right there. And so in talking about reorienting your view around what's possible and what's not, and how you hedge against a potential fall off. And maybe one of the ways you hedge against a potential fall off is by drafting an on-ball 19-year-old guard who has defensive tools and great positional size. But the flip side is that if that dude is not ready, then you've made a mistake by valuing that player and that potential future over the thing that you have right now, which is actually a championship level player.
How many 19-year-old point guards are going to be ready?
Yeah.
If they are, they're not going to be available at 17.
That's right. Let's take a break here, Pete. So when we come back, that's when I want to switch gears now and start to talk about what stock we are holding, and whether it's on the ascension or one of those penny stocks. So let's talk about JHS first, because I want to put Lewis to the side. Because JHS was a first-round pick. And there were players, as we just alluded to and talked about in the last segment, players drafted right after him who could have played on last year's team, could play on this year's team, would be able to play on next year's team, and in theory would have the type of trade value that if you wanted to go get another player, they would be an asset within that conversation.
More beneficial there too. That's right.
Rather than just salary ballast or viewed as a negative asset. So, as you know, I knew very little about JHS coming out of college because I know very little about any of the players coming out of college. When I watched him play, I saw shades of a bunch of other sort of big, sturdy guards in his game. And when we start to like make comparisons are almost always made to like players you know and good players, because we want to see the best in those guys. So it's just like, oh, I see a little bit of Chauncey Billups in this game, or I see a little bit of this guy in this game. And those things are still true to me when it comes to JHS. He's 20 years old, right? The things I like about him are his great positional size, his great strength for a guard, even as a very young player. We were talking about this with Bronny, for example, that he's 19, he's a 6'3" guard, but he's strong and he's sturdy. And if he's this strong and this sturdy as a 19-year-old, what's he going to be as a 22-year-old or as a 23-year-old? You could see that guy developing into one of the oh, this dude's a tank and you can't move him at all. And how much value does that have on defense? How much value does it have switching potentially? How much value does it have in being able to get to your own spot on the court because defenses and individual defenders can't move you and knock you off of your line very easily. So those are things I really value in JHS and I think are going to project well for him. So defense, positional size, I really like his passing ability and his understanding of passing windows. So I love the left-handed skip pass that he can make as a pick and roll player. I love the pocket pass that he can make. I love how his positional size translates to access to passing windows that some other smaller guards just don't have. So when you talk about the stock that I'm holding and sort of what I envision for him, I think these are building block tools for a player to be able to carve out a path to be productive in the NBA, particularly as a ball handling guard.
Because they are, right? And he also plays with the level of pace coming off of ball screens and things like that. Like, I see it too. I would argue, though, that his path to NBA minutes starts on the defensive end first. That's the place where he's done the most things where I've been like, ooh, look at that. That'll be really helpful. And I think that he's a guy who can guard ones, who's a lot bigger than a lot of ones. And so he is a bully ball type of guard that when you're 19, you're not stronger than a lot of 25-year-olds. But when you are a little bit older, you start getting more and more of that advantage as you get into your mid-20s. So as you explained earlier, that's a great thing to have down the line. And so defensively, though, yeah, that ability to switch, that ability to hold your ground but still move your feet, I think he can create turnovers. He's got quick hands and a good feel for that. And so, yeah, there's a lot to like on that end of the floor. But offensively is where it's like, man, it's so rough. I sent you a video right before we started recording. I made this super hatery low-light video of JHS. It just astounded me. I was thinking back, there were so many really bad misses. It's not that he missed, it's that it was just such a bad, like, elbow pull-up, like wide left and long type of thing.
Russ-esque.
Yeah.
There were some Russ-esque misses in there.
And so it's not something I would post on social media or something like that, but this has just been on my mind, right? Like hey, we haven't even talked about last year's draft is, hey, can you help get us through 82 type of thing? And we should. And like, what is there and what's good and what's not? To me, Redick is a huge figure within this, and the broader desire to build out player development. In that same Dan Weike report, he was talking about how this summer so far, which is just not starting, it's a couple weeks in, but this summer has been a lot more one-on-one, 3-on-3 live action type of stuff, whereas previous times has been a lot of individual work. And so that's been one thing that I've been asked by some fans doing playbacks and stuff is like, if the Lakers want to do player development, why did they get rid of Phil Handy? I can't answer that question fully, but one thing that I can say is that there are different approaches to player development, of which I think that's a primary one of like, are we working on your post footwork individually and on this move, right? Type of thing versus a read and react live action type of thing.
Redick spoke about this within the context of the player development program that he wants to install too. And I don't think he meant it to diminish the value of individual player work, the sort of work that the Phil Handys and there's many other guys around the league that are well known to help players develop like in this way. I don't think Redick was diminishing that, but I think what he was talking about within the context of what the team wants to do, a lot of times individual players go out and hire those guys to do that work. Mm-hmm. But within the team concept, Redick seemed that he wanted to highlight much more of that cohesive, like 2-on-2, 3-on-3, like
we
this is what groupings to.
Yes. And he's exactly correct in doing that.
So it's interesting because that idea of can you help is super important. One of the ideas that we've kicked around a lot is what happens if your 11 through 15 guys can't play? Bronny was drafted number 55 overall. The same reason why I push back against like nepotism and like all of the stuff that is conversations I don't really want to get into in general, but I also think that it's sort of weird is that the investment in a player drafted where he was drafted should be in a very long view and a player development view. And we see a couple of tools, 2 or 3 tools that we think can turn you into an NBA player eventually. And so no one's drafted at that point in order to be like a rotation player in his rookie season. And so I'm not projecting Bronny to play for the Lakers at all. Like the big club. If he gets garbage time minutes in the same way that Lewis or JHS got garbage time minutes last season, fine. But I expect him to spend a lot of time in the G League. I sort of expect the same thing for Maxwell Lewis, honestly. JHS to me is a different proposition. I think he needs reps, but the Lakers are very, I don't want to say stacked at guard, but they're deep there, particularly at ball handling positions, particularly when you have LeBron James, and particularly when your head coach has said, we want to use our center as a hub of offense because he's excellent. So you're already to 5 dudes who are guards or point guards or your superstar players who are going to have the ball before you even get to like a Rui or someone like that. Where it's just like, hey, like he could do some of this too.
So that's exactly it with JHS. Is it's sort of like in baseball, there will be times where a player is stuck at AAA. And so like JHS was excellent with South Bay and got the reps and had the ball in his hands and showed that, hey, he's got some tools to work with. But where did the reps come from? It's like with the baseball analogy, it's like you're a third baseman, for example, or some position that doesn't have a lot of, you could play a different position instead. I think I don't know the baseball norms anymore, but that used to be sort of a thing, is if you were on a team where you have this AAA player who's got some ability, but there isn't really a place for him on the big club because there are so many guys ahead of him at that exact position. Usually those guys get traded, or at least they did in baseball, where it was like, you kind of got to balance out the roster. But that to me is more of a symptom of there is an overvaluation of ball handling within the Lakers organization and the choices that they've made over the last several years. We went from like LeBron and Rondo were our only ball handlers. And then at some point, I think LeBron was like, this is exhausting and I can't do this forever. And we were like, great, we love ball handlers. Let's make every player that we sign, including a lot of our 5s, have on-ball type of skills, right? And so it was that, ingredient that they just poured too much of it into the recipe. And I think that their JHS is sort of a symptom of that.
100%. The thing is, though, is that his ultimate ceiling as a player is going to be what can you do offensively besides pass? Because passing is almost always the product of your ability to score, unless you're like a 1990s point guard. And even those guards could get you 30 points at times. Like I think of like some of the best passers, like who are 90s style guards, like Jason Kidd.
Sure.
Kidd was one of my favorite players when I was in high school. By the way, I've told this story like on the pod, but in between my freshman and my sophomore year, we were doing open run sort of stuff, getting ready for the upcoming basketball season. And we had a whole regime change within our high school athletics department on the basketball side where everyone left and we had new coaches at every level, including a new varsity coach. So there were all these holdover players. They were rising juniors into their junior season. They were rising seniors and they were coming back. And there were 5 freshmen moving into their sophomore season who all showed that they could play a little bit, and how many of them were going to play in JV, and at least 1 or 2 of them were going to make varsity, including my buddy Tim, who was like our center and our star player. He had been our best player. When we were 8th graders, we went undefeated, and we mopped up everyone. My buddy Tim reminds me of like Chet Holmgren, where super skinny, super tall, got his ass kicked by everyone physically because they thought that's how he would wear down, but he was just tough and scored anyway. I say all this because all those 5 sophomores, we all made varsity because during open runs, we were killing, basically. And I was a point guard, and I was throwing these hit-ahead passes, and I was like, oh, I grew up watching Magic Johnson. I'm going to be
just
Magic
feeding
Johnson.
all the big dogs, yeah.
Everyone, bounce passes. It was just like, I would have made Jeannie smile a ton with all the bounce passes that I was making. Our lovely
She does love a good bounce pass. Yes.
Anyways, the varsity coach was just like, here, watch this tape and read this article. And it was an article on Jason Kidd. And it was highlight tapes of Jason Kidd. I say all this to say that Jason Kidd was not a scorer, but if that dude needed a score, he could. And he put pressure on the defense in a way to create all of the passing angles that were great. So if JHS is going to be anything in this league, he better learn how to be a threat offensively. And being a threat offensively in 2024 is not the same as being a threat offensively in 1994. Mm-hmm. So let's take a break, Pete. And when we come back, I want to talk about JHS on offense and what we think he needs to do. And then we'll talk a little bit of Maxwell Lewis too. So that clip that you sent me, Pete, and the jumpers that JHS was missing, those are the shots he's going to need to hit. He's going to need to be able to hit, to me, consistently, the pull-up 15 to 18-foot jumper, because teams are going to go under on him. And he doesn't have to always shoot the pull-up three, but he better be able to show that he could hit the 18-foot jumper as like a baseline play. And then the floater, and then get to the basket and finish in traffic. Those are all essential things, but it's the jumper that needs to start going down. So talk to me a little bit about, if you agree with me, how important you think that that is for him and the growth that he needs to show there.
That's why when you were talking about JHS as a 1990s style point guard, I was thinking there's a reason why we have to describe him as such. We have to go back to that because those guys are not in the league as much anymore. And we're increasingly entering an era where it's very difficult to play you if you are neither putting pressure on the rim on offense or able to shoot. And so that's the thing where you were talking about going under. It's the same principle of the Vando video that I made the other day of like, if you can help out off of those guys in a certain way that gunks up everything, and there has to be a certain, like, it's not about the floaters or the pull-up game at all for me. It's can you make wide open shots? If you can, you have to be able to make wide open shots at a high enough level to where the defense now respects you and guards you in a normal way that lets us run our offense normally. And so that's the thing though, is that his on-ball skills are so much more advanced, but you have all these guys ahead of him in line where it's like, to what degree are teams going to close out to him, right? So say he's in a lineup with Austin. I actually think that could be a really good group if JHS works. JHS and Austin kind of complement each other, right? JHS is strong physically. He's got some tools that I think complement Austin's game. But if Austin has the ball, which I want Austin to have the ball, and run ball screens and things like that, the weak side of the defense is going to sink in off of JHS, and they're going to skip the ball over to him, and the defense is going to guard him that way over and over and over again until he makes that shot to a degree that is respectable. And so I feel like we've talked too much about shooting in a lot of ways with the Lakers the last couple of years, but it's also an area of the game where we've been one of the more atypical teams in the NBA. And I think that we're increasingly entering that era where like you got to either be like a lob threat or like get downhill something serious to the rim or be able to knock down an open jumper.
There's a saying that developed like 4 or 5 years ago that if you're not a shooter, you're a center, basically, right?
Yeah.
If you can't shoot on offense, then you should play center.
This was my argument with Russ, was that Russ was our 5, so why are we putting another 5 in the lineup? Anyway.
But how does that work when that player is your point guard? This is what I will say, is that JHS in college, he could actually hit that pull-up jumper, the 15-footer. And it was a nice like mid-range shot for him. And even in his first summer league, because he didn't play in his second summer league due to the back injury, he showed that he could hit that shot some too. The shots that weren't going down were all the step back threes and all the off the dribble threes and all the spot up threes. Those were just lower quality shots for him, and he didn't have a feel for taking them. And that sort of makes sense when he's an on-ball player, the spot up stuff especially.
That was one of the things that stood out to me, is that he didn't understand where the shots came from, which was, I mean, it's part he's young, yes, but it's also you're a point guard. But he just forced a lot of stuff to where when he did get a quality, hey, this is an open elbow pull up. He wasn't in the type of rhythm like that end of game type of lineup. A lot of players were like very much looking for theirs.
And he was one of those guys that was looking for and sometimes you try to manufacture rhythm and that comes at the expense of your own rhythm. And it's just like, okay, like you're a snake eating its tail where I'm chasing this thing and I don't know. I think I got it, but I don't. The thing I was going to say earlier, though, is shooting is one of the things you can improve in the NBA. It's just like, if you can do all of these other things well and your shot mechanics are okay, but the shot doesn't go in, we can improve your shot mechanics. The things that I have more concern about is that you're a point guard, but are you a leader or a talker? Are you the guy who can organize? Like, because if you can't be the sort of galvanizing player who has the ball a lot, it's going to be tricky for you. It's sort of like there's a like leader of men idea from that archetypal 1990s point guard who has the ball a lot.
Yeah, if that's just the guys that have survived as that type of on-ball player. We have one of the greatest of all time in that, and LeBron, who's still that in a lot of ways, have that like, you go there, this is the play that we're running. It's why Chris Paul is in the league. It's why I'm curious to see just his impact on San Antonio, even though he's, well past his prime. There's a certain amount of like organization and order that comes from that type of player that if you don't have those attributes, then you can't. How can you be an on-ball player if you don't have them?
Yeah, it's like there's a vocal element and a leadership element to that. And that's a part where last season, it was clear that that was an area of growth for him. And it's like, you can't be both. You can't be an on-ball player who isn't vocal. You can't be an off-ball player who can't hit open shots. Right. And so he's got to build these bridges within his own game in order to become a player who can contribute. And honestly, it's a shame that we're not looking at a second-year player who was drafted in the middle of the first round as someone who could potentially step in and fill a role for the Lakers. Offline, I told you that if JHS looked ready, it would be much easier to trade potentially a Gabe Vincent and try to rebalance the roster in a way where you potentially get that backup center that you've been looking for by using a player that JHS should be stepping in for and saying, like, this guy can play a little bit. We've talked a lot about JHS, though. Lewis. Where are you at with Lewis? Lewis is a guy that frustrates me in the way that you might feel frustrated about JHS. Like, I feel frustrated about Lewis.
No, that's the thing. Lewis frustrates me more than JHS. Like, JHS is like, the types of misses, they have me like, oh, is he just bad?
Sure.
I and it's not fair, but it's just like, ooh, there's a lot of roughness. You watch the video.
Yes.
Lewis, it's the decisions that Lewis makes that, because he's got talent. And then I feel like with him, it's more of does he have a come to Jesus type of moment where he realizes his place in how he fits in and what the team needs him to do, because he's got those type of tools. But there's also there's a lot of bad basketball. There's a lot of reaching in. It's the same thing where you're talking about like, oh, well, shooting's an improvable skill. Yes. Do we have the player development type of structure to improve jump shooters? And I think that we're trying to, but do we have the type of player development and this is where the switch from individual working on moves to, no, we're going to play 1-on-1s. We're going to play 3-on-3s, have some 5-on-5s here and there, and more so as you get closer to training camp. But we're going to emphasize more. These are the choices that you're making. Yeah. Why are you reaching in right here? Right? Why are you helping off of strong side corner? There was one play in Summer League where like Lewis did probably 3 or 4 things in a 2-second window on defense that led to a layup on defense. And it was all gambling, cheating, like undisciplined type of stuff. It's not that he doesn't have the athletic ability. Does he have the tools to be able to do it. Not that at all. It's that you're making bad choices constantly. And that's why he had this stretch during Summer League where he was like 0 for 17, 0 for 18. As a second-year player, as a draft pick, right, in Summer League, that's usually the second Summer League is usually the place where you're like, you should look like the NBA player out there. Now, he had other stretches where he was good and had flashes of good passing and all of that. And again, this is why I wanted to talk about this is and this is unusual for me, start from a very negative place with both of these guys.
Sometimes his shot making shined in a way where I'm just like, oh, look at you, man.
Mm-hmm.
He had a couple of games where it's just like, oh, look at Lewis with his own personal 9-2 run right here, or 7-2 run. It's just like, oh, a 3, drive to the basket, and then a transition bucket. And it's just like, oh, man, like he can get it a little bit. And then it's like, oh, dancing with the ball and like shot quality and shot pass decision making. And do I swing it or do I hold it? And those are the things where when you've been the guy, and then especially you were the guy at like a smaller school, like, and this is what happened to Austin, I feel like, but it was the opposite. He was like a role player at Wichita State. And then he's the man at Oklahoma. But he had that previous experience as being like a off-ball dude, a dude who didn't always get to be the showrunner. So when he gets to the NBA, you can see that he can call on both and he can wear both hats. And his rookie season, it was much more role player stuff. And then by the end of his second season, it was like, hey, you can do some on-ball stuff because you've got this club too. Lewis has been playing the same game seemingly his entire life. And that light bulb that you're talking about clicking, it needs to click on for him like ASAP because, look, maybe this clip will come back and bite me. He's never going to be the on-ball player who is looked at as a dude who is a first option on any unit that he plays on, not a bench unit, not a deep bench unit. That's not going to be his job at the NBA level. It's just not. If he was a CEO at Pepperdine, he's going to be, director of second tier operations at the pro level. And it's like, that's his ceiling. So you're going to get some chances to cook, but you're not going to be a decision maker within the context of things run through you. And so to me, it's that in-play decision making that needs to improve for Lewis. And if it doesn't, I just don't see how he's going to have a sustained NBA career. And maybe that's harsh, but because the physical tools are so good, but every player damn near in the NBA, 420 of the 440 have elite physical tools. And the players who don't have elite physical tools, they've got good enough physical tools. They probably go along with elite mental processing and all of these other things. And so that make them NBA players. And so Lewis is going to have to, we talked about building these bridges within JHS's game. Lewis is going to need to do something similar.
Very much so. It's going to have to start to me with the catch and shoot jumper. He does this thing which is very strange to me where he'll catch the ball in the corner and he'll have a decent catch and shoot look and he'll catch it and then he'll jab step first and then shoot the three. He very rarely will just catch and go up with the three. Even when he's open and and he's got a nice jumper, he's got a nice shooting stroke but it's super strange and speaks to the level of unfamiliarity with that job, with being in the corner and I've got to catch this and let it go. And that's not uncommon for on-ball players to be like, I got to catch it, feel it a little bit, right? Jab step, but that's on-ball player type of rhythm, but I can't score until I establish that on-ball player type of rhythm where if you're going to be that off-ball type of guy that you were just explaining, that he's not going to be the planet that everything else revolves around on an NBA unit. If you're going to be one of the satellites that revolve around a different planet, you've got to be able to score and finish when the ball's delivered to you. And so that to me is one of the first steps that first things I keep an eye on and Redick will absolutely be able to identify this and hopefully work on that. But that to me is I think we'll know a lot early on in training camp and in the preseason, especially because they should get a ton of opportunity of how much have they grown as a result of the last couple of months of being under Redick and sort of the newer approach to player development. So got to wrap up here. This was fun. We will be back on Monday. Everybody have a good weekend. But until then, you've been listening to Laker Film Room Podcast. We'll catch you guys next time.
James has got it in low to McHale. McHale wants to turn. He's double teamed. Just pass out in front. Broken up by Worthy. Tip to Magic. Worthy dies on his belly. Magic scores.
There's Magic got it. Magic fires again. They will. Lakers win the game. The Lakers win the game. Rebound is Lonnie. 3 seconds left. Van Exel to win it. It's on the way. Good.
Kobe Bryant, 48 points, 16 rebounds. Shot with his 8th block shot that ties an NBA Finals record.
A lot of Laker fans sticking around for this.
You're seeing something that's very rare indeed. A Laker to get MVP chance
in Boston. Of all places.
Are you kidding me?
Kobe, hard to believe.
Are you kidding me? Unreal. Are you kidding me?
Lakers looking to push. Bryant spinning in the lane, back for Gasol, pretty pass, and it's back to a 3-point game.
Kobe Bryant picked up by Bell.
There's the move.
2, 1.
Miss it. Unbelievable. For the victory. It's over.
Shot clock now to 5. Bryant. Yes. And that was a little tap to Alvin Gentry.
Add insult to injury, Kobe. I mean, what a shot. I mean, you can't defend that. Are you kidding me? 2.1 seconds remaining. Denver a foul to give. Jokic trying to disrupt Rondo. He puts it in. Here's Davis, 4-3 in the win. Oh, it's good! Anthony Davis has won it for the Lakers! James again. Oh, he hits another one. LeBron James putting together a closing quarter against the Nuggets. This historic 2020 NBA championship belongs to the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers conquer the bubble, and banner number 17 will soon hang in the rafters.